So hi guys, today I'm lucky enough to be with the lovely Andy Fermo, who is one of my high school buddies. He has done some amazing things in the last few years and has an amazing story to tell. I'm going to let him tell that story because it's better to come from you. So tell us what you've been doing, tell us all about invisible injuries, and yeah.
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me on your podcast, Anita. It's a wonderful opportunity to be able to share my story and our message for invisible injuries here with your audience today. So my name's Andy Fermo and I'm the co-founder of Invisible Injuries, and our charity helps support veterans, first responders and their immediate support that are experiencing post-traumatic stress and also mental health issues. I'm a former soldier, so I spent 10 years in the Australian Army and half of that with the Special Forces based out of Holsworthy in Sydney. Now, during that time, it was the dream job. It was absolutely an amazing experience during that time, but I got to work with the best soldiers at the top of their game, and I had a great leadership team, and everything just worked. It was the pinnacle of what I wanted to be able to do.
You got where you wanted to.
In the military, you know, and being, you know, a 5'6" dude, I wasn't the smartest, I wasn't the strongest, I wasn't, you know, the everything, but that was like, you know, the mental and physical fortitude to want to do that job.
Yeah.
I got to be able to do it and spend half of that time at an elite level with the Australian Special Forces. Now, during that time as well, it was a really busy period in the Australian Defence Force where we were in Afghanistan. So I got to put my Guernsey on, so to speak, and represent my country and unit on 2 tours of Afghanistan. Wow. So as a team leader, so that was something that I always wanted to do, and I got to do that on 2 occasions.
Wow.
Now, on my second tour in particular, I was exposed earlier on in our tour to what I call the trauma triangle, where we were exposed to 3 really severely traumatic events in succession. And one of them was where we ran over an improvised explosive device, or an IED, with our vehicle. So our call sign ran over this roadside bomb, and there was mass casualties. And that was the second incident in the 3.
Oh wow!
So the first incident was where Sergeant Brett Till passed away, and all of them were IED related incidences.
Okay.
So those things don't discriminate against anyone.
No.
And so he passed away, dismantling a bomb. And then our call sign ran over an IED. And then a few days later, there was another, Damien Tomlinson, and his call sign ran over another IED in severe contact as well. So
yeah, that's very traumatic, obviously.
Even
just one of those events would have been absolutely devastating.
You know, and I think at that time it was because we were so operationally focused and it was so earlier in the tour, we suffered quite, you know, it was quite a big blow to our self-esteem and morale off the cuff. But being operationally focused, we just had to carry on with the job.
Yep.
You know, pack the vehicle, get rid of the old one, and just keep carrying on. And that's what I wanted to do at that time. And so
with the adrenaline and everything, you just want to.
Yeah, so that traumatic event was put on in the shelf in the parking lot, and I could just deal with that later.
Yep.
And you know, it was just a matter of carrying on and doing what we needed to do for that job at the time. But it wasn't until I got home, and then that's why we've got our catchphrase with Invisible Injuries now, is when the dust settles.
Yep.
When the dust settled and it had that quiet time to be able to start reflecting, is when the ghosts and the ghoulies started coming out, and you know, all those things came out of the closet, where things started to fracture and break.
Yeah, and you can understand why. I mean, they're very traumatic experiences.
Yeah.
In my book, I have a chapter called Vicarious Trauma. So
Yes.
in medicine, you know, people in medicine, people in the Defence Force, people in emergency services, all those sorts of jobs, it's very much like that. You said, you know, you did it, you experienced these traumas, but there wasn't any debriefing or you know, okay, let's talk about this, let's, you know, work through these traumas right here and now. You just keep going, and you feel like you're okay until you go home, and as you said, the dust settles and things start to come up.
Absolutely. And look, you know, I tip my hat to you, mate, because I did read about that chapter last night, and having to you know, be empathetic to your patients. And then taking that on, you know, you try and, correct me if I'm wrong, but, you know, being there and empathizing with their situation, whatever that may be, and you still try and keep yourself separated. That doesn't mean that you don't take on some of that energy in whichever way. And like you were saying, is pondering over it, you know, after hours, having that come around. That's that trauma that you can take on, and having self-care surrounding that is one of the things to try and, you know. Yeah,
and for you, it was multiple sort of levels of trauma, because you had the actual trauma itself, so personalized trauma, you had the vicarious trauma, and then you also had to deal with your, as you said, you're a team leader, so you obviously felt responsible for people in your underneath you and in your group, so you were responsible to, you know, make sure they didn't suffer from the trauma that you all you know, sort of experienced. So when you got home, was it purposefully for a break, or was it just that the tour was over?
No, the tour was over. So in our particular organisation, we didn't have a break midway. We just banged it in through that. That's the term, you know. Banged it in the whole block.
And how long was that?
This was about 6, but I was there for a little bit longer because as a team leader, we had to hand over with our former counterparts beforehand, and then also to our oncoming people. So people in some of those roles, or in that sort of management or team leader roles, would stay in, and then as everyone else ripped out, they say, and then we stayed in to be able to do a proper handover, to make sure that things ran smoothly, instead of just going, okay, here you go, and
here's the keys.
Here's the keys. See you later. High five on the way.
Start the car.
You know, that was for some of the guys, but when you're in certain roles, you need to be able to make sure that you can, the oncoming person is aware of the full situation. Similar, like what, you know, like a Mr. Miss, like, you know, this is when you're handing over something is just coming through, and you're not handing over something simple like, oh, that we sold this many things today. You're handing over big deal stuff. So it's not a simple thing. But I think it's also all on, you know, it's just on different levels, you know, but the mechanism's the same. You know what I mean? Okay. And so when you got home, what sort of symptoms did you suffer? How did it sort of show its face? Yeah, well, when I got home, I just sort of, we were so busy that I didn't have a chance to really be able to take a break, to unpack everything. First of all, we were such at a high pace of preparing the next people to come on, downtime. So I actually did a few other tasks before I even got to take a break. So but going home isn't actually going home and laying down. Going home is just coming back to Australia. Just coming home back to Australia, and in my particular role, we were quite busy, so I kept on doing what I needed to do before I could actually then take a break. So when I did finally get to take a break, or I'll backtrack from that a little bit, is that my wife, my now wife Claire, she had a certain, she fantasized and romanticized about how we'd be repatriated when I came home and everything like that. And you know, it was to an extent, but then I wasn't quite the person, or not quite ready for that type of... It's not a celebration for you. And but for her it was, because we were repatriated in the ways, and she'd thought it over in her head a little bit, and, you know, I didn't want to be the guy that was the bubble breaker. So it was fantastic to be finally repatriated with her, but it wasn't in that sort of sense where... You know, yes, there was the big hugs and kisses and cuddles when we got there, but, you know, she wanted to go out and do all this, and then, you know, I was still jet lagged and sort of kind of, we went out with some friends, but then I still had all the sleeping tablets from the way through, and then I was like, oh, a couple of beers, and it knocked me out. So,
and it's not like you've been at the Olympics.
no.
You know, it's not a homecoming from the Olympics, and
No.
you know, you've been in a really traumatic environment, doing really traumatic stuff in a really sort of difficult political sort of scenario as well.
Yeah.
Where you can understand how she would have been so excited to have you home and like,
100%.
let's get our life started, you know, back on track and that sort of thing. But when you're in it, and like you said, you'd experienced all those different various forms of trauma.
Yeah.
It's about, okay, how do I do this without carrying this for the rest of my life?
Yeah, and you know, so all those other little things there started manifesting in themselves. You know, I found it difficult to sleep, just adjusting back to you know, an urban environment, or you know, to civilization as I knew it from that third world environment was a big thing. You know,
absolutely.
a culture shift was massive. Being around all these things and some familiar stuff that was familiar, but I'd only been dreaming about it, and then it kind of felt I was like in a bit of a like, am I dreaming, or no, I'm back home, and you know, I'm safe now.
Yeah.
And but I just, you know, wanted that comfort as well, of because I'd been around my team and my call sign and the company that I was with for so long. You know, a lot of guys say I just wanted to get away from people, but also at the same time that was true. But I also wanted to have that comfort of knowing that they were there. So we wanted to go out and party, get on the booze. And so I think it was just trying to really decompress and, you know.
And to be with people that experienced what you experienced. Because then, you know, you've got your insider jokes and you've got things that you can say that you certainly wouldn't say to mates that weren't in that environment. So that's a support in itself.
Oh, 100%. With that familiarity.
Yeah.
Because stuff that might not be seen as politically correct in terms of the way that you talk to each other or the subject matter you do, you need to find, you know, humour's one of the things to keep the morale up. And sometimes it might go to a deep and dark or too early place in political correctness. But there it gets you by.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, we're like that in medicine as well. I mean, obviously, we sit around, you know, eating dinner or lunch or whatever with each other, talking about horrific things. And, you know, in a normal environment, you wouldn't bring that up at dinner, you know, with your family or whatever. So tell me about the rest. So you started to sort of unhinge a little bit.
I was unhinging a little bit. And then it just got to that point where, fast forwarding a little bit there, where I knew that I was doing things in excess. You know, to start, and then I knew that things weren't quite right, where I kind of needed to go and seek some help. But for me, because of the type of role that I was in, I didn't want to. Let me say in an analogy, is that I'm in the grand final team and I've got a niggling shoulder injury. I don't want to tell the coach about it. I want to be on the field. I want to play that grand final, because like you would in the military, when you go overseas, you're playing a grand final every night. I didn't want to not say anything that there was anything to compromise my role on the team to go to the next trip.
And that's because that's part of your identity as well.
Oh, of course.
And that happens in medicine as well. Like, there's a big problem in medicine at the moment where if a doctor does report, you know, problems with alcohol or problems with mental health or anything like that, there's a mandatory reporting system where the other doctor or whoever they've told it to has to let AHPRA know, and AHPRA is the governing body. So that's another reason. It's exactly the same.
It's like that duty of care that they've kind of got to do, but you just go, well, I don't. So I don't want to tell anyone. And what I suppose my undoing in regards to that was I sought help outside my chain of command of what needed to be, because I still wanted to be. Because
you were afraid of
the repercussions. Like that's what, you know, that's career suicide in that sense of putting it out there to say, because you were vulnerable and at that time we were so busy that it was easier to be able to have them piss someone off, let's say, like just get rid of them, as opposed to having to deal with that because we're so busy. And which I do get that point of view, but for me, having experienced that where it was like from hero to zero in one, and losing my high security clearance because I was open about seeking help outside the system, and being almost too honest,
Yeah.
was to my detriment.
And it's a discipline. You feel like you're being in trouble.
Yeah.
And that you have been persecuted for being honest about having trouble dealing with traumas that are horrific.
Yes.
And that are because of what your job is, which is very similar with medicine.
Yeah.
Dealing with people that are dying, dealing with trauma and that sort of thing. And then to not have the debrief, and it's very similar, the hierarchy and having to sort of keep your mouth shut if you want to keep your job, which is very frustrating and very similar in those two fields.
There are.
It's the man up.
That's right. And I think that sort of when you're in either industry in your occupation, you're 10 foot tall when you're in there, but we're all human, and then we're susceptible to being vulnerable. And this is what I say, Anita, is vulnerability now doesn't, it's not a sign of weakness. It's if you're self-aware enough to know that you're in a vulnerable position, that doesn't mean it's for life. And you can work on a vulnerability to make sure that you strengthen that bit, but it's just acknowledging that that's a bit that needs to be worked on.
Absolutely.
In the first place.
Yeah, and if you weren't suffering from some sort of trauma or PTSD or any sort of psychological issues following what you'd experienced, then you'd wonder about those people.
I'd be very worried.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so logical that trauma, we know all about it. I don't know if you read about Cabarlah Mate in my book. He's a physician in overseas, and he basically says that all disease is caused by trauma. And basically if you keep trauma within your body, it becomes disease, and in different ways. And so whether it be that you're using alcohol more than you should, or whether it be that you become sort of a bit confused or lost in terms of your identity, or whether or not you actually get a disease, so skin conditions, autoimmune conditions, those sorts of things. So tell us a little bit more about what happened with you. How did you get to the realization and start this charity?
So I was that was earlier on in the piece, and when that happened, I knew that I had to seek help. So when I finally sought help, I was fortunate enough to have, this is back then, I was fortunate enough to have an advocate that said, that had been in my shoes, he'd been in a similar organisation, and he was an advocate. And he said, Andy, swallow your ego's there, but just swallow it, and I won't swear, I'm going to be conscious that I'm not going to, but he goes, swallow your ego, just do what I say now here, and what we'll do is we'll put some systems in place, checks in place. You don't need it right now, you might need it later on, but let's just have a plan in place, and I'll teach you to navigate for when you do need it. You might not need it now, you might not need it down the track. And fast forwarding, 10 years later, so I discharged in 2010, Anita. Oh, wow. And so I've been up and down. The most recent with how invisible injuries came around is we moved from a beautiful place in the Central Coast, which is just north of Sydney, and it was called Wagstaff, and then we moved to another sea change place, to Noosa. And we thought that was going to be a big, like another sea change, where we were closer to some immediate support, being, Nana at the time, my wife's mum, and, with one and two kids, the birth of a second child, we needed to be closer to some immediate support. Now, we thought that Noosa was going to be our thing, but that place there was one of the, as beautiful as it was, and as a holidays destination, living there was a totally different kettle of fish, and it wasn't without its challenges for us there. So as much as it was awesome, it was also an uphill battle, being away from immediate support, changing a few things that weren't working for us anymore in our life. So, and then trying to secure a home. So one of the things for us is that at the start of 2018, we'd saved up, that was our idea. We needed home, the great Australian dream of home ownership. And we secured something. As soon as we secured it, the Banking Royal Commission happened. And then so all of a sudden we had to jump through all these hoops in our business and our lifestyle to try and fit into this box that they kept on saying, jump and say how high. And fast forwarding that whole year, I had only just gotten some sort of care with a GP and my psychiatrist when we'd moved, and I'd come in from like spiraling down and not taking care of self-care to this point where I was in an okay position, to all of a sudden then having to focus on so much trying to secure this home that I let everything by the side again. So all my self-care, all my tools, I just let that go with a tunnel vision. I was like this, focused on doing that, and at the end it all culminated where I had this other face where I'd be okay, the smile was okay, and then really on the inside I was breaking down and falling apart. And the culmination of losing our house at the end of that 2018, we were essentially homeless because we couldn't secure that home, and we were camping in a place called Kilkeven, which is just north of in Gympie. And so we were camping, bush camping, licking our wounds, going, what the hell are we going to do now? And it was when my wife sort of floated the idea that, well, why don't we, you know how to navigate your way out of this. You're in a bad spot. We can acknowledge that you're in a shitty spot. That was the worst. Out of this adversity,
that was
homeless,
the worst time.
The worst time. We'd lost everything. We, just dumped all this money on renovating this old 100-year-old Queenslander. It was looking amazing. So that was all of our dreams and identity. Businesses, we sort of adjusted, and so all this stuff happened to us, and we're at rock bottom. And she said, why don't you now document your road to recovery? Then why don't we find out what's available locally in terms of the services that are out there? You've done a couple of public speaking events now, which is one of these things, which is stories of hope. That's why this book's so, means so much to me, and the opportunity to share my story. There was the start. There was the catalyst to be able to say this is okay. And then she said, look, you can do some public speaking. Why don't you share your story? Because there's power in the messages of sharing your story, and find out what your other peers are doing, and then share that with other people. And so there's the clinical environment, but also the lived experience story, and how people can manage and what they do, and take nuggets of gold out of that, Anita.
And it's so important to be able to relate to somebody that's real.
100%.
Like when you're in the armed forces or in medicine, they're like, if you need help, here's the services to visit. That's very different from watching a podcast or reading a book about somebody who actually has navigated that system. Because what I'm getting from your story, which is really devastating, is that you would think that an intelligent guy who's worked and built his way up in the armed forces, been in combat in Afghanistan 2 times, had a horrific trauma, a person from the general public would just think that the army would have just supported you and you would have been set for life after that. So it's interesting to hear that that's not the case, obviously.
That's a bit of a yes and a no, Anita, is that there's systems and places out there to be able to help veterans, right? So, but ours is veterans and first responders. But I think that it takes the system to try and get there. Once you get the safety net underneath you, it's all right to be able to then work on the self-care that you need to get there. But the system is broken in a way that it makes it so difficult for a veteran to get there. And you mentioned that with in your book, where you might have people come in and clients go, you're not a financial expert, or you're this, and people are saying, I need this written in a certain specific way to be able to get this next step in my application for whatever it might be. So that in itself makes it so difficult for veterans.
Absolutely. I've had multiple patients that are veterans, and I myself have been traumatized by the process that you have to go through, and the hoops that you have to jump through, and like you said, the wording. People ask me, I prescribe medicinal cannabis, and we found with one of my guys who suffers from really bad PTSD that it was working really well. But it's expensive. It's, $200 a bottle. He wasn't working, he's unemployed. And so just the paperwork alone for me to try and get the DVA to pay for this for him it took 6 months, but it was a lot of back and forward. So that was 6 months where he didn't get that treatment that he could have really benefited from.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, that's just one example, and I'm sure you know lots of other examples, but a lot of people give up, you know, with that system because the system itself is traumatizing.
Yeah, that's right. And so when you're not in that good mental headspace, things become really difficult, and it becomes almost a too hard basket. Why should I have to step through these? And with invisible injuries, that was part of what we wanted to do, was go, well, look, there's stuff out there, and yes, once you do get there, it can help you in some way, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the first responder space. But at the same time, there needed to be that if you don't quite qualify for, you know, you don't quite have your veterans card, or in this instance, let's use that as the example, where do people fit in to be able to receive care or some support? So that was what we wanted to do, is to be that organisation that connects people or has some holistically based programs or information that's from based on sound research findings from you know, from different organisations and the research papers.
So you're supporting them by showing them other opportunities,
a practical application,
and things like how to do an application, or which type of GPs to go and see that do know how to fill out those forms. And
that's one, but also some of the holistical things, you know, like, you know, besides just better diet and this, well, what does that mean for some people? You know, getting out of bed and just going for that little bit of a walk and going, this is our interpretation of the research findings, and this might work, what's available in your area. And that's why when we went on the last 9 months, is finding out what's available already locally, and then going, okay, well, hey, John from that's the, you know, first responder, what do you do for your own self-care in your own time? Well, I like to go fishing, and these are the spots that we could go to. Well, that, you know, for me, I'm like, okay, well, I'm not the best fisherman, but I'll give it a go and see, okay, I can see how that might work for them. So what we do is go, look, there's all this stuff that's out here, let's present it to you, and whatever floats your boat, then you could go and do find
things to fill your day with, and things that excite you again, and help you heal, rather than just sitting with a psychologist in a room reliving the trauma over and over again.
Well, that has its place as well, and it's I suppose sequentially in the order. You know, that I think that's one. And then it's also supplementing it with some other stuff that you don't have at the time. You know?
Because I certainly find a lot of people, especially in the DVA system, because the DVA system that I am aware of, they do support psychotherapy, and I do find people do get a bit stuck in, I'm seeing my psychologist twice a week, you know, for the next 5 years. Whereas if you're going to give them these opportunities, okay, you've seen your psychologist, you've done the work, you've done, you know, basic trauma work. I don't know if, are you familiar with EMDR? So is that something that you would recommend on your...
And you mentioned, and I reckon it's a great thing to be able to, you know, when you've got someone that's guiding you through it, a specialist and someone that knows what they're doing that helps guide you through it. That was one of the really early modalities therapies that I was exposed to earlier in the piece. Really early exposure therapy to all that stuff, and then recording it and then going through over and over,
reprogramming the brain's messages and that sort of thing.
And it was something that I was really open to, because at that time as well, if we're going back to that early days, is that some of the guys were suiciding and they weren't in a really good spot, and they had that brain fog, as you mentioned as well, all the time from all the meds that they were taking, and it scared the shit out of me, man, to be honest with you. Like, I'm like, far out, man, I'd rather have a bullet coming past me than some of the stuff that some of the guys, my colleagues,
than to feel out of control or out of you know, connection with yourself. And
so that for me, I'm like, okay, there must be a way to try and, like, I was willing to give like anything and everything a go to see what stuck with me. And that's what you know, credit to DC, the advocate DC at the time, was he said, mate, if it doesn't work for you the first time, or if you don't connect with someone, just try until you find something you can connect with, because it might be, you know, that you don't have that connection with them
Yeah.
off the bat, or you've tried, you know what I mean? They
Yeah.
didn't quite listen. You didn't feel like you were
and
listened
you're
to.
never going to find the right person, straight up. So with invisible injuries, that sounds like that's one of the big messages is to not give up and to keep trying, and that you guys are going to support and advocate and offer different programs. How do people read more about invisible injuries and or even donate and support it?
Absolutely. So we do have our social media platforms, so both on Instagram and Facebook, so at Invisible Injuries. And then we also have our newly built website as well, so www.invisibleinjuries.org.au. And then we're also there, you can donate, so we're a registered charity with DGR status, so we can fundraise and all that. And then also we are a partner where we are in partnership with it's a for-profit with purpose. It's called Classics for a Cause, and those guys have partnered charities that that fill that gap and provide some of the services for the veterans and the first responders that are kind of waiting to get into the system and that. So they're providing a service there. So then what they do is they have build up muscle cars, and then do their rifle giveaways, and then, so the proceeds from them go to the different programs, whether it's so it's either military assistance dogs, equine therapies, breathing modalities, organizations that are doing these other holistically based activities for mindfulness. And
that's brilliant.
And then so that's helps fill in that gap while people are waiting to be able to get the recognition so that they can get the specialist care.
Yeah, because it definitely does take a long time to get either, I don't know, a white card or a gold card or whatever, or get your diagnosis even. I've had patients that have been waiting 3 or 4 years to have their diagnosis approved, and I'm sure you're on top of all of this at the moment, but obviously this has been in the media a lot recently because there is the inquest going on at the moment into sort of suicide post-combat, or even suicide within the armed forces. Have you been watching much of that?
I have been keenly watching that, and also made a submission through some other partner organisations. So, put my 2 bobs worth in for submission through a channel there. And last week was the first sitting of public hearings for the different organisations to be able to share their stories and lived experiences with suicide, because I know a few dudes that have suicided as well that were ex-colleagues, and then obviously working in this space now is working with vulnerable people. So that's one big thing. And then also one of the things that I have sort of tried to do, have some foresight on, is because it's a long process for a Royal Commission.
It seems like it's taken so long.
It's taken so long to even get to the start line.
A lot longer than we would have thought.
So I actually thought, I need to be able to do this, and done some of the courses, and now is being a lifeline text crisis support volunteer. Because I think that knowing supporting the general public is a big one, but also having first-hand experience about not dead reckoning, this is what they, help seekers looking at now, will give us some valuable insight as to being able to, how can we help veterans and first responders that are in that space down the track. Because, you mentioned that in your book, it's like, well, I'm a professional and I'm trying to seek help from other professionals, but they're kind of not being heard.
The system is just so broken, like you said about your system, and we really do need to come together, and we need to be more open about the holistic stuff. Like Medicare will fund you to come and see me at the GP, but Medicare's not going to fund you to go and help build a muscle car. Even though, doing something exciting like that or going fishing is probably going to be much more beneficial to you than sitting in a room with me for 15 minutes. You might need a script from me, or you might need that, but it's all about getting your confidence back, getting your identity back. What is life like for me now? And I get frustrated in my job because I want to be able to provide that, but we are time poor. Appointments are often, once a month once every couple of months. So I might see these guys, 2 or 3 times a year.
Yeah.
So now I'm very happy to have something to refer people to, which I certainly will be doing.
Because I think it's the touch points, Anita. What you're saying is that you don't have all that time to be able to say it. Like, as a GP and treating practitioner, saying, look, a good, let's just say, for example, good nutrition, better sleep, and go and do some activities is one thing. Okay, then if I was to be the client on the other side, okay, how do I do that? Okay, here's some stuff that will allow you to do those things with people that in a non-judgmental environment at your own pace.
Yeah.
And
having access to meditation programs and things, rather than me just giving people something that will make them get knocked out and go to sleep at night so that they don't think about it. What about actually letting us fund programs where people learn proper meditation, or they learn proper, like you said before, breathing skills and that sort of thing, so that those are lifelong skills. It's not coming back to see the doctor every 2 months for your script so that you can sleep at night.
Yeah, and I think, look, there's ways around, like, and you're right about that. So that's something, if I, because I like to be able to share I'm quite open with what my, as a end user say, and then as someone that's in the field now, so to speak, is that, yes, I've got some stuff to help me sleep, but I only use that now for when there's that as required.
Absolutely.
And then so I use that as required from my practitioner's advice, and then I try and supplement it with a self-care plan that hopefully puts me in a better spot so I don't need it. But when the time comes, at least then that way my body's not used to it, it's not built up a tolerance, and then so it does what it needs to do without getting, addicted or reliant.
Absolutely. And I think that's a big move that, especially in holistic healthcare, is it's about reducing people's reliance on medication and improving their reliance on themselves. So yourself, when you might need to take it, or you know yourself when you don't need to take it, rather than just having a script that says take every night, 2 tablets, and then you just keep doing that because you don't know that all these other amazing things are available. So tell us a little bit about this book.
Okay, so with the Stories of Hope, this is written by Kerry Atherton. Lovely lady, an awesome mate of mine now. And so she hosts on the Sunshine Coast something called the Stories of Hope. It's once a month, and she gets guests in from all walks of life that have been through some sort of form of trauma or adverse event. And it's about sharing a little bit about the adverse event, but it's just about, well, what did they do, or what was the tipping point for them to go and seek help, and what are they doing now? Because a lot of these people end up helping other people as well to be able to pay it forward in some way.
Absolutely.
They don't need to make it their career, but
it's a big part of the journey.
Yeah, and sharing that lived experience is a big message, because that was one of the things. And so I first met this is volume 2. In volume 1, I was asked to do some male modelling for some surfwear in Noosa, and this is for Melbourne Cup Day. And then the 2 fellas there were in Kerry's book, and shared their stories. One was a traumatic brain injury guy. Another guy was, given 2 weeks to live or some ridiculous amount of time from cancer. And, it's now 10 years later.
Wow.
Yeah, so these guys are really inspirational dudes. And they said, they met me and we hit it off. And she asked me to share my story.
Yep. And so your story's in this.
Now it's in this story with 12 other amazing, inspirational people that have come back from that brink of being in a very dark spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because in medicine we have this rule: whenever you're learning something, you see one, do one, teach one.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a big thing. I mean, we did it for suturing and stuff like that. But I feel like with my experience and with yours, we've both sort of done that. We've seen it, we've done it. Now we're teaching it, because you have to share those experiences, and I think that you're almost compelled to.
Yeah.
Not everybody has to, and like you said, some people do it in a much less vocal or public way, but just having those people's stories available helps you realize you're not the only one. You know, you're not the only one that's been told you're crazy by a doctor. You're not the only one that's, you know, had this traumatic experience and you know, it hasn't been easy coming back from combat, and then it wasn't easy all the way along. You know, you continue to have ups and downs. So I think that's a really important and powerful message that you're putting across. And I just want to tell everybody about the amazing trip that you're doing. So you were obviously, you said you were camping and you were trying to think of, okay, what are we going to do next? So tell us about what you've been doing.
Yes, so from the adverse time from 2018 Christmas till when we departed in 2020, you know, with everything going with COVID, is that, you know, I needed to get back on the bandwagon and create, you know, document our journey. And one of the things that we also said is that at that time when we were camping, is Claire felt like, she said, oh, let's just run away. And I said, oh, well, I'm not a runner. I'm an ex-soldier and I'm not that type of dude. You know, like I'm a fighter, but if we get this, why don't we try and replicate and go to find out what services are available around Australia, especially in remote locations or even way in the outback, you know. So lessly populated regional towns and in the outback as well, where there's maybe not as many services, but there's stuff that you can do if you're using those principles of holistical modalities in a way. And so 9 months we left. So 9 months on, we've done southeast Queensland, and then the Northern Territory and WA. So we've done 27 tour locations. Wow. And our goal was to be able to meet up with 1,000 veterans and / first responders and 200 immediate support or families during that time, which we're very close to being able to have that, having just done half of Australia. So COVID's
that would have made it very hard.
COVID was always, you know, we were always kind of a little bit ahead of some of the stuff, but it was always on our forefront of our minds of the travel restrictions that needed to be happening. We could always talk about that later on.
Yeah, that's a whole nother episode.
Yes, but you know, it was important for us to be able to do this because, you know, we've done it primarily off our own backs. We are a charity, but we have done our own fundraising. So we didn't get any grants, but we didn't let COVID or anything like that stop us from what was important to us and gave me purpose in the family.
Yeah, that's right.
So we
brought you guys back together as a family as well.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, so like and during that time we've met so many families besides the veteran and the charity component. It's been a really great journey and adventure. You know, on all levels, including that spiritual level, however you might want to see that, because we've connected with each other and also been to spots there that you go, this is just amazing and I know why. And then the more travelers that we've met, they are in it for a similar reason. Yeah. You know, and then also I think that lots of people have, given the current situation that's going on with the pandemic, is that people have gone, well, look, life's too short to wait till I'm a grey nomad to do this. And there's so many younger families on the road making ends meet and doing what they need to do, but still having an adventure because it allows them to be able to see and do things. Yeah. Which is what
an adventure. I mean, the kids must be so.
Yeah, and so you know, we've met those people. We've done over a dozen public speaking events, and you know, I'm a DJ as well, so I've taken the opportunity.
You should watch his music; it's very cool.
Thank you. And you know,
very uplifting.
Yeah, you know, so you know, if I get to perform, and it's usually for free, or so, you know, we'll do a contra deal. It'd be in the caravan park. It's like, you know, I get to do like a radio station would, is play a few songs, you know, no repeat work day, here's their songs, and then say our story and then the mental health message as well. Because I think music, like one of those other modalities, is one of those mindfulness activities that helps you either relax or, you know, can change your moods and be mindful at that time. So that's part of what we do as well. And I get to share that with my love for it now with music with our audience, which is a good
Yeah,
thing.
and that's a really nice way of, like you said, introducing people to the story, because you don't want to just be going around in the caravan park saying, who's a veteran? Does anyone want to come and talk to me? But, you know, you're obviously very, you know, charismatic, and, you know, you can attract people to talk to, you know, in a more relaxed way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the way to be able to go about it. And then people would see our signage, it stood out like dog's balls. And, you know, they'd come up to us after, you know, an event or at the cafe, oh yeah, you serve, or yeah, what did you do? Or well, I know someone. So it really softened and opened the conversation. So for us, we didn't need to be the clinician, because I'm not the clinician. I'm not the specialist. But what I am is a mental health advocate that helps facilitate the conversation in a way that destigmatizes it and normalizes to be able to talk about stuff, you know, deep stuff, but not always. You don't need to go right down into the detail. It's just addressing the issue and going, okay, where do you need to go from there?
And just having people come up to you that you know for sure would never have access services otherwise is just brilliant, because you're opening up, you know, you're literally opening it up to them to say, let's have a chat. And, you know, you don't get to see what happens afterwards after you've left all these towns, but I'm sure that it's making a massive positive impact on their lives. So well done.
Thank you so much. You know,
I'm very happy for you, and I'm very proud of you. Obviously,
thank you so much.
You know, we went to school together, and you know, we didn't go to one of the best schools in the world, but you know, I think one of the big things that I've learned, and one of the things that people keep saying to me, is that things happen for a reason. And you know, with everything that happened with my health, I mean, I was a doctor and I was working normally as a doctor and just plodding along. I wasn't happy, but I was doing it. But then when I got to the, you know, to the bottom, to the dark, you know, where I couldn't even think straight, walk straight, and I really realized that this did happen for a reason, you know, like this happened for a reason, because I need to make these changes, and like you said, the holistic changes, and look at the world in a different perspective. So looking at, you know, connections with people as being more important than your mortgage, or you know, how much money you make, or how much you know, objects you have, or what type of car you have, that sort of thing. So I think your journey sounds very much like mine. In the sense that it's not about, you know, life and the energy of the earth and the universe and the spiritual journey really does open your mind up, and it's so much more rewarding than, you know, 9 to 5. You know,
if you can, and it's about trying to also make it work in that sense, like, you know, sort of from that losing everything, you know, having spent that time on the road now, you minimalize everything and what's important there around you. You don't need all the other noise and stuff out there. And then what we found is that people who have those experiences together, you know, whether it to prevent sort of that social isolation, if you're doing stuff together, or find people that you can do things with and remember them, that brings so much more out to it. And then also the power of, you know, like you see, let's use the indigenous, you know, mindset, that relationship to country and all these things. Like some of the best spots, and revisiting when I grew up as a kid in the mining towns, you know, the Kakadu, you know, Karajini National Park here in WA, and all these other spots have a certain healing quality about them if you actually just stop and
absolutely,
and take it and get away for that little bit and disconnect from all the other
and be
noise.
open to let it heal you. I think that's the big thing, because a lot of people just sort of traipse through like Karajini and they're like, oh, look at this, and take 1,000 photos and then get in their car and go. But actually going there with the intentions, like good intentions and intentions of healing is so important. But I highly recommend you go to Karajini, because I've been there as well. Oh, it's just unbelievable. But well, thank you very much for coming on. Have you got any last things that you want to say? Any
absolutely
messages?
Absolutely. Well, firstly, to Anita for inviting me on the podcast today to share the story and what we're doing with invisible injuries, but also for you and your powerful story, and congratulations on your book. It takes such a, you know, to have come and been in that dark spot, and to really have a voice now, to really be no BS, this is how my experience is, to share that with your audience and have been in that vulnerable state.
Yeah.
You know, is to put it out there helps change the stigma and voice around what you're trying to do in your industry and highlight deficiencies. So that's really important. And then also to all those veterans, first responders, and the immediate support that are looking after to all those that are currently serving or ex-serving. Thank you for your service, and thank you for everything that you've done for the country in what you've been doing. So have a good one, and
excellent.
I really
and
appreciate
also
it.
Please visit the website and the Facebook page, and you know, if you haven't done it before, do it. Today's the day. And I will put all the details of invisible injuries and everything alongside this podcast so that you can get in touch with him. So thank you very much.